Hi, my name is MachineRite, and this is Understanding Fortnite. So the fastest way to get used to new keybinds is understanding the elements that make new keybinds difficult to get used to in the first place, and also understanding how your brain actually learns new things. So there's a few different elements to learning keybinds. The first and most important one is going to be your muscle speed and your muscle memory. This is just going to be the raw ability to press each one of your binds individually without really thinking about it. I don't like to use the word muscle memory, but in this case, it is actually just simple muscle memory to remember pressing different keybinds and the actual action of your finger moving to a different keybind. And the reason that I like to rope muscle speed in the same kind of category as this is because you can't really move fast to a different key unless you have some sort of basic muscle memory down. Now the reason the speed and this basic level of muscle memory is so important is because when you go and try to relearn all of your techniques and builds on new keybinds, even if you do get to the point where you can actually kind of do the build, you still may get hindered by this lack of speed and this kind of awkwardness where you don't have that level of muscle memory to just quickly and efficiently move between all of those keybinds, or even just press them fast enough. For example, with editing, if you don't actually have enough speed built up yet, then you're not actually going to be able to perform the technique correctly, and you're going to have a really hard time actually learning the implicit process. And what I mean by that is just memorizing the edit and technique to the point where you don't have to think about it anymore and to the point where it's automatic. If you're still struggling with speed, then that whole process of learning that is going to get delayed. Ideally, you want to build up your actual muscle speed and the speed that you can press your fingers faster than you'll ever be able to visually process doing an edit or doing any other build technique or sequence. If you have the ability to press all your binds faster than you'll ever need to perform any of your building techniques or any of your editing techniques, then really the only thing that you have to learn at that point is just the timing, because speed wouldn't be a factor anymore. Trying to learn these things both at once can be super difficult because both of these factors are constantly going to be fighting with each other. Let's say you practice a technique as fast as you physically can that day, as in as fast as your fingers can actually move. That may not be the ideal speed to perform that technique, and over time you're going to have to increase that speed. But the issue is you're going to learn the timing over and over again for a slower speed, and every time you try and increase the speed, you're going to be interrupting that memory of the timing for that technique. So ideally you want to just practice the speed until it isn't a factor anymore, and make sure that you can press all your binds faster than you'll ever need to when performing any kind of techniques in game. Then when you practice, the only thing you're going to have to focus on is the timing. This is important when you're learning new keybinds, especially if you're using a brand new key or pressing a bind with a finger that you have never pressed it before with. You're going to struggle a lot more with the speed than the actual timing with that specific bind. This is something I see a lot when people try to use thumb binds when they've never done it before, or try and use pinky binds when they've never used them before. It takes a long time just to build up that raw muscle speed. Okay, so the next element is going to be something I call finger independence. So what I mean by this is all of the tendons in your hand, or the little strings that move your fingers, are very closely connected, especially with the ring finger and the pinky finger. These two fingers are really hard to move individually without moving the other one, and it takes a lot of practice to have that independence to move them individually and separately from each other. This is something that happens a lot when people have pinky binds that they've never used before. Often they'll try and press something on their pinky, but then realize that they actually have something on their ring finger that they have to press at the same time. For example, with their pickaxe, a lot of people have pickaxe on Q or 1, and you're going to have to reach pretty far with that ring finger, but if you have to press something with your pinky at the same time, you're going to run into that weird independence blockage, and that's something that needs to be practiced, especially if you have a lot of binds on those fingers. And in this video I'm going to show you a way that you can actually focus on this and practice this. And the last element to consider with binds is your implicit memory. So this is all the things that your brain performs automatically without thinking about it. This is like breathing, walking, all of those things. And this type of memory takes a while to build until you can do these things without thinking about them. And earlier I mentioned muscle memory, and I would describe muscle memory as a subcategory of implicit memory, as they're almost the same thing, except implicit memory actually covers a much broader range of things. Like implicit memory can be your reactions, and the reason this relates to new keybinds is because there are some reactions for certain binds that you're going to need to rebuild. The best example is holding builds when being sprayed at. This is kind of like a visual reaction that you're going to have to rebuild by actually having that scenario happen to you. And implicit memory is also going to be what deals with a lot of your just actual building techniques. I wouldn't say some of the building techniques are raw muscle memory, because there is a lot of actual visual actual reaction, and you're receiving a lot of visual information and doing things based on that. It's not just like a very quick memorized sequence. There's actually a lot more going on than that. So taking every single one of these elements and isolating them and learning them in the correct order is going to help you learn your keybinds a lot faster. Okay, so to practice muscle speed, just lay out all of your new binds in front of you, or specifically the ones that are on new fingers or are new keys that you've never really pressed before. For example, I switched to thumb binds a while ago, so I was actually practicing pressing thumb binds a lot. Just spamming these, and I actually changed my hand position so I could actually get better leverage on the thumb binds, and I started twisting my hand a bit more, so my thumb is actually using the stronger muscle and pressing downwards, similar to how you would press buttons on a controller. You can press buttons with your thumb a lot faster on a controller, just because of the muscle that you're allowing it to use. But on keyboard, a lot of people have their thumb sideways, which is actually using the slower muscle on your thumb. Depending on your new binds, you may have to shift your hand around to press certain binds faster. You have to really experiment. I would say before you start practicing, just go on each finger and press it for as fast as you can for about 30 seconds. During a drill, if you feel that finger is hindering you in its speed, then what you can actually do is after one rep, you can just practice pressing it for about 30 seconds, and you can just repeat this process. Basically, just try to be smart about it. So yeah, there's lots of creative things you can do to just focus on the speed before you start practicing the timing. So to work on your muscle memory and your speed as well, you're basically going to want to create a bunch of these exercises for yourself. So start by listing out all of the binds on each finger. And basically all you're going to do is you're going to go through each finger and press all of these binds, starting from the bottom and working your way to the top, and then doing that in reverse. So for example, here's all my index binds. I'm just going to go through and press these in the fastest order possible. Seems kind of boring, seems kind of dumb, but you kind of will notice that after you do this as a warm-up, you're going to feel a lot faster. So yeah, just do this for each finger for about 30 seconds each. Okay, so next we're going to create some different exercises for something I call key skipping. Basically, in all your binds, you're going to want to pick out which binds have key skips. And what I mean by key skipping is when your finger has to reach across a bind to press something. So for example, if I'm holding D and I have to reach for my last inventory slot, then I'm going to have to let go and I'm going to have to skip all the way to 4. So yeah, we're basically going to go through and look at our list of all of our binds, and we're going to figure out which ones have key skips. And if you have a lot of binds on the same finger, it can be kind of tricky to work this out. So basically what I do is I start at the bottom and start with one bind, and I'll just go through and list every key skip for that bind. So I'll just start at D, for example. The closest key skip, or at least I would consider it a key skip because it's almost diagonal or perfectly diagonal, is R. So I go D to R, and then I go D to 3, and I go D to 4. And then we go to the next bind, which is F. So we do the same thing. We go D to E, D to 3, D to 4, and we're basically just going to create exercises like that. And here's an example of what it would look like with my binds. And I would practice each one of these key skips for about 15 seconds each. So what I mean by that is this D to 3, I would do 15 seconds, D to 4, I would go back and forth for 15 seconds, and then D to R, I would do back and forth for 15 seconds. So next is your finger independence. With this, you mainly want to work on your ring and your pinky finger. And some people may have a lack of independence between their middle finger and ring finger, or their index and middle finger. I'm not really sure. So if you feel that you do, it's definitely worth it to practice this. This is a bit complicated to explain, but basically you're going to create these little exercises similar to before, but this time you're going to be holding one bind with one finger, and you're going to be cycling through all of the binds on another finger at the same time. So here's the example of the exercises that I would create for my binds. So I'm going to start with holding Q, and I'm going to cycle through all my pinky binds at the same time. This is probably the most difficult for me because I have to stretch my ring finger out to press Q, and then I also have to reach down to press Shift and caps lock. So this is super awkward to do. And while doing this, you're going to want to rest your fingers on WASD, or in this case it's just going to be W and D because I'm holding Q. Make sure that you're not actually holding them down, but just resting them on top. You'll find that actually resting these fingers just on top is actually even more difficult than pressing them, because as you're doing this, those fingers are going to want to move around a little bit just because of finger independence. You can see there my middle finger started moving on its own. And then after that I would move to A and do this. And then I'm going to move to Z and do the same thing. And then we're going to reverse the roles. We're going to hold one of our pinky binds, then we're going to go through all of our ring finger binds. making sure to rest our fingers on W and D without pressing them. And when you're doing this, make sure that you're not like tensing up. Unnecessary tension and using more strength than is required is one of the main things that causes issues like tendonitis and anything like that. And you'll find in the long run, less tension is actually going to make you faster. So yeah, again, you can do these 30 seconds before you play. If you find that you're having issues with finger independence on a specific technique, then you could stop that technique for a second and just practice this for another 30 seconds in between. Some of these things may actually be so difficult for you that you may actually want to just unplug your keyboard for a second while you're watching videos or anything like that, or taking a break, and just practice on repeat, just doing all of these drills, or maybe doing the ones that you have the most trouble with. And this also applies for the muscle speed drills. Practicing these over and over whenever you can is definitely going to help. Okay, so last is going to be implicit memory. This is the hardest thing to build. So when you first start learning new binds, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you're practicing everything in large sets. Through this video, I've had clips playing of me practicing in large sets basically. So the reason that you practice in large sets instead of just free building and doing random drills is for a couple reasons. The main reason is going to be your self-correction window. Building in Fortnite has a lot of estimated timing, and these aren't really things that you can consciously draw out. So let's say remembering a sequence of numbers, that's something that you can repeat in your head and you can visually like understand it and see it. But timing for a build is something that isn't really existent in like a written form or a verbal form. So it's very hard to remember for long periods of time and even short periods of time. Now I'm only really guessing just from experience, but I would guess that about 5 to 10 seconds is usually how long you can remember this kind of stuff. So you want to make use of this time where you can remember this whole build sequence fresh in your head by doing another rep immediately after. And this way you can take all of that memory of that timing and you can slightly tweak it and adjust it to make the build faster and more efficient over time. The other benefit to large sets is making use of the working memory rehearsal effect. So basically your working memory is your conscious memory. These are things that you can verbally think about, and basically things that haven't become implicit or brand new skills are going to generally be done by this memory. And this memory isn't really good at multitasking, so that's why brand new skills are so hard. For example, if you're riding a bike, the reason you start off with training wheels is so that you can learn how to turn the bike first without really worrying about how to balance yourself. Doing these things both at once is extremely difficult, but by isolating the turning and pedaling aspect, you can learn how to ride a bike much faster if you start with training wheels. And by rehearsing something over and over again, or doing something over and over again, the working memory can kind of start to get in a rhythm, and it can start to perform a lot more efficiently. So as you build in large sets doing a bunch of reps over and over again, yeah, you get into that rehearsal effect, and you can actually perform the build better over time without having to sleep in between and without having to build any implicit memory, which means you're going to get more quality reps in the same session. So making use of this rehearsal effect is super useful. And like I said before, there's lots of drills on my channel that you can do that work in large sets. Now, while doing large sets can help, there's also the task switching aspect that does still have to be trained. So while free building doesn't help you learn the actual techniques as fast as you can, it does train the task switching aspect, which is basically when your brain switches between doing different tasks. And by doing all the techniques and getting them down beforehand, you can actually devote all of your practice to the task switching. You may notice when you're free building, you are kind of thinking of the technique that you want to do next consciously, and then you kind of do switch over, but sometimes people have issues switching techniques. So the other elements of implicit memory, or the more reactionary ones, are probably the most difficult to practice because you're going to have to practice actual fights. So you could do standard 1v1s. I would actually practice realistic 1v1s because there's healing involved and your weapon slots and bind slots often get full. So if you've changed those, that's really useful because you get an opportunity to practice the implicit memory and getting that reaction to select a heal bind when you need to heal, or go from a heal bind back to your shotgun, anything like that. Another really good thing to practice is zone wars. This is going to practice that reaction of holding a build when someone's spraying at you. If you're tunneling low ground, then you're often going to have that happen to you where someone will just randomly start spraying at you. Someone will be in the back of a zone trying to get in, and you can hold a wall against them or practice things like that. There's lots of different reactions in that are challenged, that are different from realistic 1v1s. And often with realistic 1v1s, there's not a lot of surprised reactions because you often know where your opponent is. But with zone wars, it's a little bit more hectic and you have a little bit more unknown information going around, and your reactions get tested just a little bit more, I think. And also zone wars, you pick up a lot more loot off the ground, so you can practice that aspect with your inventory. So this is really good if you have new inventory binds to try and practice this. Arena can be useful, but the issue is there's so much downtime in between each fight of Arena that you may have trouble getting into the rhythm of your new binds. So when you're trying to learn new binds, you basically have a conscious thought that's telling you to overwrite your old implicit memory and your old muscle memory from the old binds to switch over to the new binds. So when you're playing a realistic 1v1, you're constantly fighting and there's no time to forget about those binds. But with a arena game, you may just get in a fight, and that first section of the fight, you're already forgetting your binds, and you have to remind yourself again. And you lose that rehearsal effect and the feeling of what it's like to use the new binds. And you may also just lose that fight right away, and then you're going to have to wait again to fight. So creative fights are going to help you learn new binds a lot faster than arena. So yeah, that's all for this video. Thanks, guys.